It's the day of the Diesel Gala at the Great Central Heritage Railway, with star guests the Royal Highland Fusilier and Sir Edward Elgar. But things aren't running quite as smoothly as they should.
One loco dead, stock we can work round. I'm having to make it up as we go along though.
The Great Central Railway in Leicestershire is the only double-track heritage railway in the world where full-size steam engines can pass each other, just as they did in the golden age of steam. In the late 1960s, when steam was phased out, a group of enthusiasts determined to keep it alive took over this 8-mile stretch of track between Loughborough and Leicester and opened it as a heritage steam railway. The year is packed with special events, often showcasing visiting engines from all over the country. This all means careful planning and a hectic time for the 40 staff and 700 volunteers. At Loughborough Station, the Great Central is ready for one of the highlights of the calendar, a Diesel Gala. With over a dozen locomotives running and hundreds of visitors of all ages expected, it's going to be a big event. Volunteer Andy Carter is going to be driving some of the diesels at the gala today.
Well, we've got a fantastic lineup of engines today. We've got 13 engines. It's the biggest diesel gala that we've ever staged, and we've got a lineup I think that suits everybody's tastes.
One of the biggest attractions today is a Class 50. There's never been one here at the Great Central before.
South Yorkshireman, first class restaurant car departure.
The station master on duty is volunteer Alan Whiteland.
Today's one of the busiest days on our calendar, because obviously normally we would operate a scheduled steam service. But there is a big following for diesel engines that were brought in during the 60s and 70s, which no longer operate on the main network because their life expired. And a lot of groups have sought to save them and restore them, a bit like vintage cars really. And we have quite a few based on the line. So today we're running an intensive timetable with all these different locomotives pulling our trains, and it's brought out people who have an interest in restored diesel locomotives.
Most of the people on the platform today have travelled specially to see the diesels.
We've got a couple of visiting locos that have been brought in from another heritage railway, which also adds a bit of variety. We've got our own fleet working, so I think there's about 13 locomotives in total. So yeah, very busy, very hectic, and we're putting on a bit of a show today.
Diesels were brought into regular service in Britain in the 1930s. And in the 1950s, the first Deltic diesel locomotives were built. One of the star attractions here today is the Royal Highland Fusilier. This Deltic is the type of diesel that hauled express trains between London and Edinburgh in the late 1960s and the 70s. Also visiting the Great Central is Sir Edward Elgar, a Class 50 built to haul express passenger trains. Fireman Pete Buckley is a regular steam volunteer, and he's finding that today's diesel experience is a bit different.
I'm a reluctant diesel recruit because when the diesel started coming in, obviously the pace of scrapping of the steam engines obviously quickened, so it was the end of an era. So in a sense they were the enemy. But it's quite interesting. Obviously it's a completely different thing to what I'm normally used to.
Father and son team John and Andy Pepper are working on a Class 25 diesel, D5185. These diesels were nicknamed rats because they got everywhere. For John and Andy, like many other volunteers at the railway, a love for locos is in their blood.
I was first taken to a railway when I was in a carry cot about 2 months after I was born, and ever since then I've just been around railways. It's part of the family history. I mean, we've had generations of family working in the railways, and it just seems like a logical thing to do, and it's a good different thing to be doing with your life.
My father was on the railways, and my mother met him on the railways. Her father was an engine driver. My dad's dad was a station master, and my dad was actually born at a railway station.
We do work together on the locos quite a lot as father and son. I mean, sometimes it's a bit more friendly banter and stuff, and it's a bit more, I suppose, more of a personal thing really when you're working with your father. But there is still the respect of he is my driver, I'm his subordinate. I do have to do what I'm told, whether I like it or not. I'm still under his care and under his tuition, and he does know a lot more than me, and there's still a lot I need to learn. So it's good.
But he still says things to me that he wouldn't say to other drivers.
Dad and son are working well together today as they prepare the diesel for service at the Gala.
It's a 1963 Darlington-built machine. It's the oldest of the class in preservation. There's quite a few of these particular locos around, but this is the oldest one of the lot. Has a claim to fame. It actually was the last one active on the railway. It rescued a failed train at Chester and took it to Crewe, went onto the sidings and was just turned off, and that was the end of its career. And we've been looking after it for some years now. We put it back together and got it going, and we're looking after it ever since. Locos like this, it's 45 years old. British Railways decided it was scrap and not worth keeping 20 years ago. So in that sense, we've been keeping something going that they had decided a long time ago just wasn't worth it.
It's our autumn diesel gala, so we've got to check the loco over thoroughly because it's been stood for a few weeks without running, so we need to check its oil levels in all of its components and check that there's no damp got into any of the electrical gears, stuff like that. Just generally make sure it's in a good working condition to perform its duties for the day.
Meanwhile, on the platform at Loughborough Station, Alan Whiteland is coordinating events in the station master's office.
This is the nerve centre of the railway, really, and where everything operates from. We have a duty traffic manager, who you see sitting there at the moment. His job basically is to ensure that all the right locomotives are in the right place, they've got drivers, and everyone knows what they're doing, and basically oversees the whole operation for that day.
Dave Cobley is the duty traffic manager today. It's his job to turn the planned locomotive schedule into reality.
This is the timetable, and that's what we call the shuntograph. Every move is down there in order. I didn't put it together. Some very clever people did. I just work it.
But it doesn't always go to plan, especially when trains run late.
I was once set about by an elderly lady with an umbrella, because she was very annoyed. I must admit, I must have looked very rude because I stood and laughed. I couldn't help it. Just couldn't help it at all. But generally, they're okay. But we are dealing with vintage equipment, and it does go wrong.
But today, the team are hoping for a smooth ride. Each engine is carefully assessed by the experts. The railway doesn't have its own Deltic diesel, so Mike Hallam-Rudd from the Deltic Preservation Society, who own this loco, have come to help driver Andy Carter carry out the checks.
What we have to do is first of all check that all the brake blocks which are on the wheels are sitting facing onto the tyre face, and there's no cracking on the blocks, and that the pull rods here which actually apply the brakes onto the tyres are secure on their housings and they're not hanging down. We've got the body to bogie retaining strap, so that if the locomotive rolls over or derails, it keeps the two parts together. That's secure. Again, you've got two on each corner. Obviously, we're going to make sure there's enough fuel in there for the day. We'll need about 80 gallons today, so we've got ample there for today. Same again on this side. That's a breather for the fuel tank. Right. As you say, just make sure they're clear so nothing's in there. So, because as the fuel goes into the tanks, obviously it needs to be replaced with air. Okay. Otherwise, you get a suction effect.
Okay.
And it's not just the exterior checks they need to do.
Reservoir airs on.
Mike and Andy delve into the engine compartment of the Deltic.
All we need to do in here is do a visual check on the level of the gauge of the oil inside the vacuum exhausters.
Okay.
Now that one to me looks about 3/4, is that right?
About yeah, 3/4.
Yeah.
So what's the minimum level that you would allow it to run at?
There is actually a mark there, it says number
number
one.
one.
When it gets
Okay.
down to number one, that's your absolute minimum. With a generator check, it's just a visual.
Right.
Open one of the flaps, doesn't matter which one. Just look at the commutator strips to make sure they're clean, no scoring, no marks.
Right.
And then, particularly on a damp morning, just run your fingers across.
Just make sure there's no condensation on there.
Yeah, exactly right, because if you've got too much damp condensation, when you press that button and apply power, you're going to have one big bang.
Yes.
Next thing we do is move down to the main power unit itself. First thing, just have a look at the fuel governor here. Make sure everything's okay. There's no burst pipes, no leaking oil or fuel, because potentially dangerous if it gets too hot. Next thing, Andy, is to check the oil level in the oil sump tank. You see, there's your full mark there, there's your empty, and your oil level is actually just above the half mark. There's ample there for today, we don't need to do any top up.
Right.
With all the checks complete, it's time to start up Royal Highland Fusilier. And with the Deltic ready to go, the crowds are starting to gather. Coming up, someone's in danger of missing their dinner.
We've got two people who were booked on the 115 for dining. We have the conundrum whether we go now and then they turn up and say, well, you didn't hold the train for us, or do we just go anywhere? We've got a train full of passengers, obviously who want to eat.
And one of the diesels takes a turn for the worse.
Unfortunately, the O3's died.
At the Great Central Railway, it's the day of the Diesel Gala, an event that's been planned for months. Steam engine fans are always out in force at the railway, but today they're joined by the diesel enthusiasts too.
If we hadn't saved them, they wouldn't be around now to enjoy.
You've heard the expression petrol head, well, it's brought out the diesel heads, really.
Alan and the team are the public face of the railway, but one of the crucial roles is often unseen. In the signal box, volunteer Garth Lewin is responsible for operating the signals that stop train collisions. In the early days of the railways, accidents were quite common, but the arrival of the electric telegraph meant that the signal box could use a system of bells to send a message to show when a train had passed and a section of the track was clear. The warm sunshine at the Gala may be ideal for the visitors, but sometimes extremes of temperature can cause a problem with the signalling.
We live in an age today where you press a button and you expect something to happen. But of course what we've recreated here is the way things used to be prior to the digital age. And signalling was no different. It's all mechanical. So literally the signalman will pull a lever in the box, it will operate a rod, or it will operate a cable which will pull the signal or will move the points across. Now of course those rods all have quite a degree of metal in them, so when it's warm it heats up to the point whereby the expansion means that things don't quite fit snugly, and everything's fail-safe, it has to fit into it or it doesn't move. So that's the basis behind it, is gets warm, metal expands, doesn't fit in the hole anymore.
The weather today hasn't been hot enough to cause any major problems, so the timetable for the Diesel Gala hasn't been affected. At a diesel event like this, the team have the opportunity to experience running both steam and diesel engines. Volunteer Pete, an ardent steam enthusiast, is getting to grips with handling a diesel.
So it's all a bit strange for me. Changing ends, we have to keep changing ends every time we change direction. It's something different, you get a good view along the track. It's a nice day.
There's quite a following for diesels. Two main companies designed them: English Electric, who built Sir Edward Elgar and Royal Highland Fusilier, and Sulzer, who built many types, including the Class 25. People often follow one or the other, but today at the Gala, there's a variety for visitors to see. The Deltic was built by English Electric. Andy, who's driving it today, has a new addition for the engine, a special headboard.
We were lucky enough at the Quorn swap meet last weekend. There was a chap who sells nameplates, and he had this on display in the boot of his car, and we approached him about hiring the nameplate for the weekend, and he was absolutely overjoyed that we wanted to use it as it was originally used. It is a genuine headboard, talisman headboard, as used on Class A4 steam locomotives.
While the diesel gala continues, the railway are still running the first-class dining experience, pulled by a steam loco. Each weekend, passengers are whisked through the Leicestershire countryside in style as they sample a traditional three-course meal. James McIntosh is one of the staff members at the Great Central Railway and is the chef in charge of this first-class dining service. After a career as a chef in the Merchant Navy, James is passionate about his role at the railway.
It's an intense job. I sort of got into it, and you become part of it, and you wish to see it develop. And once it becomes a career, you know, some people say I've got a job and they just go to work. When you see the things that need improving, and you throw yourself wholeheartedly into that job, you start to enjoy it more. Keeps you highly motivated. The first class carriage is set in the 1950s. We're trying to recreate the experience of that era, and I think we're quite successful because we get a lot of patrons and a lot of repeat business. It's unique because we're travelling through the Leicestershire countryside, and it's just the whole experience. A lot of people tend to like it.
But as time ticks by and the departure time of the dining service approaches, there are 2 passengers missing.
We've got 2 people who were booked on the 1:15 for dining. We have the conundrum whether we go now and then they turn up and say, well, you didn't hold the train for us, or do we just go anyway? We've got a train full of passengers, obviously want to eat. So we're going to give them another minute and then we're going to go. Most days it's not too bad, but you do tend to get people sometimes who cut it a bit fine. But if we know where they are, that's fine. It's when we don't know where they are, we just have to assume that they're not turning up.
With most of the passengers seated and the final 2 still a no-show, the dining train leaves the station. Just when the day was going so well, a drama is starting to unfold.
The loco's got a problem, so it's not able to run, unfortunately.
Time to announce that the 205 departure platform 2 has been cancelled.
Is this problem of some sort?
No, it happens. It happens.
In the station master's office, Bob Smith has just started his shift as the duty traffic manager, and he's thrown into the problem of a broken diesel.
Got brake release, but no movement.
All it takes is for one loco to break down, and all the careful planning and busy timetable of events is at risk of going up in smoke. But Bob has found a solution to the problem.
He's going to have to grab him.
Yep.
Lob him in the loop.
Yep.
Jocko can then come off, grab him from the loop, put a pair of them back in 3 road and shut down.
Kevin Tilbury is the driver of the broken down engine.
Well, it's a new engine to the railway, and it seems to have an intermittent fault on the air system that controls it. So unfortunately, while it worked earlier, it's decided to stop working. So it's best to take it back to the shed and have a look at it rather than risking it breaking down elsewhere en route.
Was the 250 your next working, Steve?
No, my next working is 350.
This goes for the 250. He went on the 140. He'll be on the RMB stop when he gets in, so he should be back in time.
I'll go and find him tail.
Yeah, I mean, he goes top and tail anyway. So.
The team are going to move the broken Class 03 engine back to the sheds and get the passengers moving with another diesel.
Occasionally you have problems, and the trick is managing them and trying to not disrupt the overall gala.
One loco dead, stock we can work round. I'm now to make it up as we go along, though.
Is it carrying passengers or...?
Unfortunately, the 03's died. The loco's dead. Not capable of movement under its own power.
Again, that tail?
Sorry?
Again, the plus the tail?
Well, we can't run a top and tail with only one loco, unfortunately. So we've just had to knock movement on the head, unfortunately.
90% of the time you use 10% of your knowledge when everything goes well, and when things go wrong, that's when all the rest of your training comes in to try and understand what's wrong and what to do about it.
Hello, Garth, it's Rob. Right, the one fortunate piece of news is we can actually work round the stock. What we're going to do is the Jocko that's currently at the north end of the stock in number 2, he's going to run round, pick up the 03 from the south end and get the pair of them down the middle out of the way.
Crisis averted. The timetable has been adjusted and the other diesels, including Royal Highland Fusilier and Sir Edward Elgar, are running well, so the team have avoided any major hold-ups for the passengers. Next time on Central Steam, it's a case of old chums reunited as the railway celebrates its 40th anniversary year.
I started coming over most Saturdays in the early 70s, working on locos, bit of everything, and met a lot of people and made a lot of friends.
And a fire on the line threatens to disrupt a very special event.
Can we not douse it with water or something like that? Have we got any watering cans?